Ethan Cole stood in the great hall of the Villery Palace. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely see where it ended. Shimmering lights floated like stars, and tall crystal pillars reflected them in endless colors. Alien nobles with long robes and jeweled crowns filled the chamber, each one staring at him with curious eyes. Humans had only recently joined the galactic stage. To most empires, they were newcomers from a small and rough world. No one expected much from them, and many still questioned why the Villery Emperor had invited a human to his court. Ethan knew this. He could feel the weight of every stare on his shoulders. Still, Ethan had a habit of hiding nerves behind humor. His mother used to say, "If you cannot be the strongest in the room, then be the one who makes people smile." Standing now in front of rulers who could crush entire fleets, he reminded himself of those words. A deep voice announced, "The Princess Lysera of the Villery Empire." The chamber grew silent as she entered. Lysera walked with calm grace, her long silver hair shimmering like liquid light. She wore a flowing gown of soft blue that shifted color with every step. Her eyes, bright as starlight, moved across the hall until they rested on Ethan. She stopped before him, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. Ethan knew he was supposed to bow. He knew he was supposed to greet her with the proper phrase the human diplomats had taught him. But nerves got the better of him, and his own awkward humor slipped out. He gave a half smile and said, "Hey sweetie." The words echoed in the quiet chamber. Ethan realized at once that he had said something completely wrong. His stomach dropped. He expected laughter or outrage. He expected guards to drag him away for being foolish. Instead, Lysera's cheeks turned a soft shade of violet. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back at him. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles, and she whispered, "Yes, darling." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Nobles leaned toward each other, their jeweled crowns shaking as they whispered. Ethan blinked, confused. What just happened? Why was everyone acting like he had just proposed marriage? Ethan forced himself to stand straight, though his heart raced. He glanced at Lysera, trying to understand her reaction. Her gaze was steady now, and though she looked calm, he noticed a faint tremble in her hands. The emperor himself sat at the far end of the hall, watching in silence. His expression was unreadable, but Ethan thought he saw the corner of the emperor's mouth lift as if in amusement. One of the nobles finally stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is unacceptable. A human uses the sacred bond words as if they are nothing but a jest." Sacred bond words, Ethan thought. What did that even mean? He had no idea. Lysera raised her hand, stopping the noble from speaking further. Her voice was calm yet firm. "The words are spoken. That is all that matters." Her statement only deepened the confusion in Ethan's mind. He had meant nothing serious, yet the entire court acted as if he had spoken some ancient vow. After the formal introduction ended, attendants guided Ethan to a guest chamber. He barely noticed the beauty of the golden walls or the gentle music that filled the air. His thoughts kept circling back to what had happened. He sat down heavily on the soft bed, running a hand through his short brown hair. What did I do? I just called the princess sweetie like a nervous fool. Why did she answer like that? Why did the whole room react as if I started a war or asked for her hand? Outside the chamber, whispers already spread through the palace halls. Nobles debated what it meant. Some were angry, others curious, and a few laughed quietly at the idea of a human being tied to their princess. For Princess Lysera, it was no laughing matter. In Villery culture, words of affection spoken in public carried deep meaning. They were not casual. They were promises. To her, Ethan's words were not a joke but a bond. Her answer, given without hesitation, revealed a truth she could not ignore. The galaxy had just witnessed something that was never meant to happen. A human stranger had spoken words of destiny to an alien princess. And whether Ethan liked it or not, his life had just changed forever. Ethan woke early in the guest chamber, though he had not slept much. His mind was full of questions. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way Princess Lysera had blushed and answered him. He had never seen an alien react that way before. The palace attendants brought him food that looked like colorful glass fruits, each glowing faintly with light. He tried one, and it tasted sweet and cool. Still, he could not enjoy the meal. He needed answers. Soon, a court advisor entered his chamber. The advisor was tall and thin, with pale green skin and sharp golden eyes. His voice carried no warmth. He said, "The Emperor wishes for you to understand what you have done. The princess will meet you in the Star Garden." Ethan followed the advisor through long corridors lined with silver patterns. The palace was more beautiful than anything he had seen on Earth, but the weight of many stairs followed him. Guards, nobles, and servants all watched him pass, whispering as if he carried a crown he never asked for. At last, he stepped into the Star Garden. It was an open courtyard filled with glowing plants. The air shimmered with tiny lights that floated like fireflies. In the center stood Princess Lysera, her gown softer today, her long silver hair flowing in the gentle wind. Ethan stopped a few steps away. He wanted to speak first, but his words caught in his throat. Lysera looked at him with calm eyes, yet he thought he saw something softer beneath them, something uncertain. Finally, she spoke. "Do you understand the weight of the words you used yesterday?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I thought I was just being friendly. Where I come from, those words do not carry such weight." Lysera's voice grew quieter. "In our culture, they are not casual. When spoken in public, they are taken as a vow. A vow that binds two souls together. That is why the court reacted so strongly." Ethan felt his heart pound. He ran a hand across his face. "So when I said that, they thought I was asking you to?" "Yes," Lysera answered before he could finish. "They believe you spoke the ancient words of bonding." "And I gave my reply." Ethan stared at her. He had meant nothing more than a nervous joke, yet she had answered as if it were real. He could not understand why. "Why did you reply like that?" he asked. "You could have laughed at me or ignored me." Lysera looked away toward the glowing trees. "No one has ever spoken to me so freely. Every noble I meet bows, flatters, and hides their true heart. You did not. Your words were careless, yes, but they felt alive." Her honesty caught Ethan by surprise. He had not expected a princess to speak so openly. She continued, "For my people, bonds are not always chosen. They are arranged, planned by families, used to join power with power. Yet when you spoke, it felt like something was mine, not my father's, not the council's. Mine." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle on his chest. He wanted to tell her that he had not meant any of it, that he was not ready for something so large. But when he looked at her, he saw the hope in her eyes, fragile yet bright. He could not bring himself to crush it. Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps filled the garden. A group of nobles entered, their expressions sharp. One of them, a tall figure with deep blue robes, spoke loudly. "This cannot stand. A human cannot claim the Princess of Villery. It is an insult to our people." Ethan tensed. He was about to defend himself, but Lysera stepped forward. Her voice was calm but carried strength. The words are spoken. They cannot be undone. You may not like it, but it is my choice. The nobles exchanged uneasy looks. Some muttered about tradition. Others glared at Ethan as if he had stolen something precious. The leader of the group finally hissed, "If he truly wishes to stand beside you, let him prove himself in the trial of worth. If he fails, the bond will be broken." The nobles left as quickly as they had come, leaving silence behind. Ethan turned to Lysera, his eyes wide. "Trial of worth, what is that?" Lysera looked at him with both worry and faith. "It is a test. One that will show the court if you are worthy to remain at my side. Many will hope for your failure." Ethan gave a small laugh, though it was more nervous than amused. "Great. So I came here to shake hands and make peace, and now I am stuck in a space empire's version of a talent show." Lysera did not laugh. She only said softly, "They will see what you truly are. And so will I." Ethan swallowed hard. Whatever this trial was, he knew one thing for certain. His joke had turned into something much bigger than he ever imagined. Sparkles, the palace was alive with whispers after the meeting in the Star Garden. Nobles walked the shining halls with sharp eyes, their voices low but heavy with judgment. Servants bowed politely, but even they stared longer than usual at the human guest. Everywhere Ethan went, he felt the weight of those stares. He sat at the edge of a crystal fountain in the guest wing, watching the water change colors as it rippled. He could not shake the words of the noble who had demanded the trial of worth. A test to decide if he was worthy. Worthy of what? Worthy of whom? He had not asked for this bond, yet it was his now. A voice broke his thoughts. "You sit here as if the whole galaxy rests on your shoulders." Ethan looked up. Princess Lysera stood a few steps away, her gown a lighter shade of silver than before, flowing gently as if it carried its own breeze. She sat beside him without waiting for permission. He sighed. "Maybe it does rest on my shoulders. I did not come here to make trouble. I was supposed to shake hands, smile, and talk about trade. Instead, I said the wrong words and now everyone looks at me like I stole their crown." Lysera's eyes softened. "You did not steal anything. You spoke, and I answered. That is all." Ethan shook his head. "It might sound simple to you, but for me, those words were just a joke. Where I come from, we call people sweetie or darling without thinking much. We use them to tease, to lighten the mood." She studied him closely. "For us, those words are never light. They are ancient, tied to the soul. To speak them in front of others is to declare a bond that cannot be broken easily. That is why the nobles are angry. To them, you are an outsider who stumbled into something sacred." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "So to them, I am either a fool or a thief. To them, you are a storm," Lysera said gently. "Something they did not expect and cannot control." Her words lingered between them. For a moment, Ethan almost smiled. A storm was not the worst thing to be. Still, the thought of the trial of worth made his stomach twist. Later that evening, Ethan was brought before the Emperor's council. The great chamber was filled with nobles, each seated in curved rows that rose like steps of a theater. At the center, on a raised throne, sat the Emperor himself. His eyes glowed faintly, like two suns burning in calm darkness. The noble in blue robes, the same one who had challenged Ethan earlier, stepped forward. His voice carried through the chamber. "The human must face the trial of worth. It is tradition. It is law. If he fails, the bond is void? If he succeeds, then we must accept him. The emperor lifted a hand. Silence followed. He looked directly at Ethan. Do you accept this trial? Ethan's mouth felt dry. He wanted to say no. He wanted to explain again that it was all a mistake. Yet when he looked at Lysera, standing with quiet dignity at her father's side, he found his answer. Yes, he said. I accept. The chamber stirred with voices, some mocking, others surprised. The emperor gave a single nod. Then it is decided. At first light, the trial begins. That night, Ethan tried to rest, but his mind would not quiet. He wondered what kind of test the Villery used to measure worth. Strength he would lose. Skill with weapons he had little. Knowledge of their traditions he had none. What he did have was determination. Humans were stubborn. That was their strength, even when the odds were against them. As the hours passed, he remembered something his old commander once told him during training on Earth. When you cannot match their strength, match their will. When you cannot win by their rules, show them new ones. The thought gave him a spark of courage. He would not give up, no matter what the trial demanded. Morning came with the sound of bells across the palace. Attendants led Ethan through bright halls until they reached the trial grounds. It was a vast arena, its floor of pale stone carved with glowing runes. High walls circled it, filled with rows of nobles and citizens eager to watch. At the far end stood 3 great gates, each one marked with a different symbol. Ethan stared at them, unsure what waited behind. The emperor's voice echoed over the arena. Human, today you face the trial of worth. 3 challenges lie before you. To succeed, you must show courage, wisdom, and spirit. Fail, and you will never again stand beside my daughter. The gates rumbled as they began to open. The crowd leaned forward, their voices rising. Ethan's pulse quickened. Whatever waited for him, he knew this was his chance to prove that a human was more than a careless fool with the wrong words. He stepped forward, ready to face the storm he had created. The arena floor glowed with pale light as Ethan stepped forward. Thousands of eyes watched from the high walls. Some were filled with curiosity, others with open doubt. Among them, Princess Lysera stood close to her father's throne, her silver hair shining like a beacon. The 3 gates loomed before Ethan, each marked with a different symbol. The first gate showed a roaring beast. The second showed a twisting maze. The third showed a rising flame. The emperor's voice carried through the arena. The first trial will test your courage. Behind the gate of the beast lies your challenge. Survive, and you may continue. The gate of the beast rumbled open, and a creature stepped into the arena. It was taller than any man, its skin like dark stone, its arms long and heavy. 2 glowing eyes fixed on Ethan as it let out a low growl. The crowd cheered, expecting the human to falter. Ethan's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had no weapon, only his mind and his body. The creature charged, shaking the ground. Ethan waited until the last moment, then dove to the side. Dust rose where the beast struck, missing him by inches. The crowd gasped. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. He could not fight it head on. He needed another way. He noticed the beast's movements were slow to turn. Its heavy arms dragged it off balance. When it charged again, Ethan ran toward one of the glowing stone pillars at the edge of the arena. At the last second, he dodged aside, and the beast slammed into the pillar. The pillar cracked, dust falling. The crowd shouted again, this time in surprise. Ethan repeated the trick, luring the beast again and again. Finally, the pillar shattered under the creature's own weight, and it stumbled, roaring in pain. Ethan climbed onto its back and struck at its glowing eyes with all his strength. The beast roared once more, then collapsed, defeated. The arena filled with cheers and gasps. Some nobles looked shocked, others impressed. Ethan stood breathing hard, his body aching, but he raised his head high. He had survived the first trial. The Emperor's voice spoke again. The second trial will test your wisdom. Enter the gate of the maze. The second gate opened, revealing a dark tunnel. Ethan stepped inside, and the gate closed behind him. He found himself in twisting paths lined with glowing walls. Strange whispers filled the air, making it hard to think. Ethan moved carefully, marking his path with small scratches on the walls. He had trained for survival back on Earth, learning to keep calm under pressure. He told himself that a maze was just a puzzle, and every puzzle had a solution. At times the whispers grew louder, filling his head with doubts. They told him he would fail, that he did not belong, that he was a fool. He clenched his fists and pushed forward. He remembered Lysera's face, the hope in her eyes. That memory kept him steady. Hours seemed to pass, but finally he saw light ahead. He followed it and emerged from the maze into the arena once more. The crowd erupted. Few had ever completed the maze. The Emperor's gaze lingered on Ethan, no longer filled with doubt but with interest. The Emperor raised his hand. The final trial will test your spirit. Enter the gate of flame. The third gate opened, and heat poured out. Inside was a wide chamber filled with fire. At the center stood a bridge of narrow stone leading across the flames. At the far end was a small pedestal holding a glowing crystal. Ethan understood at once. He had to cross. The heat burned his skin, but he stepped onto the bridge. Flames leapt higher, trying to push him back. His heart told him to stop, but his spirit pushed him forward. Step by step, he moved across, every breath heavy with fire. Halfway across, a surge of flame rose so high it nearly swallowed him. He dropped low, pressing himself to the hot stone. Pain seared through his arms, but he refused to give up. Slowly he rose again and took the last steps until he reached the pedestal. With shaking hands, he lifted the glowing crystal high for all to see. The flames died down, and the arena filled with thunderous noise. The people cheered, and even the nobles who had mocked him were forced to stand in respect. Ethan returned to the Emperor, placing the crystal at his feet. The Emperor rose, his voice strong. The human has faced the trial of worth. He has shown courage, wisdom, and spirit. By our law, he is worthy. Lysera's eyes shone with pride as she looked at Ethan. He was tired, battered, and breathless, yet he stood tall. He had entered the arena as an outsider, but now the galaxy would remember that a human had passed a trial meant to break him. The news of Ethan's success spread quickly beyond the palace walls. By the time the sun set over the crystal spires of the Villery capital, half the empire had heard the story. By morning, the whole galaxy was speaking of it. A human had passed the trial of worth. In the palace, servants whispered the tale as they carried trays. Merchants in the city shouted it to attract customers. Even distant colonies sent messages filled with disbelief. Some called it a miracle. Others called it an insult. Inside the royal council chamber, the air was thick with tension. Nobles sat in their seats, faces hard, voices sharp. The noble in blue robes rose once more, his anger clear. He declared, "This is a trick. A stranger cannot walk into our halls and claim the princess with nothing more than clumsy words and borrowed luck. Another noble added, if the people believe this, they will question our traditions. They will question us. But there were also voices of doubt among them. One younger noble leaned forward and said, yet we all saw it. The human survived the beast. He solved the maze. He carried the flame crystal. Would any of us have done so with no training and no knowledge of our ways? The chamber filled with arguments, some shouting for Ethan to be cast out, others saying his trial had proven his worth. At the center of it all sat the emperor, silent and thoughtful. His gaze moved from noble to noble until the room grew quiet. He said, the law is clear. The trial has been passed. The bond stands. The words silenced most of the nobles, though anger still burned in many eyes. Outside the chamber, Ethan and Lysera walked through the palace garden. The flowers glowed softly in the evening light, their colors shifting as if they breathed. Ethan felt the weight of what he had heard through the whispers in the halls. Not everyone was happy about his success. He looked at Lysera. You know they do not want me here. Some of them hate me already. Lysera stopped walking and faced him. Her eyes were calm, yet he saw a flame behind them. They hated you before you stepped into the arena. Now they fear you, because you did what they could not. That fear will not break you unless you let it. Ethan gave a tired laugh. Easy for you to say. You grew up in all this. I am just a guy from Earth who does not know which fork to use at dinner. Her lips curved into a small smile. And yet you faced the trial with more courage than any of them. That is why I answered you. Ethan's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to tell her again that it had been a mistake, that he had never meant for this bond to form. Yet the way she looked at him made it hard to say. For the first time, he wondered if it really was a mistake. But the galaxy outside the palace was not so gentle. In distant star systems, rival empires heard the news and laughed. Some mocked the Villery for letting a human into their royal bloodline. Others whispered of weakness, saying the empire was distracted by foolish matters of the heart. Reports reached the Emperor of fleets gathering near Villery borders. Ships that once kept their distance now moved closer, testing defenses. The human's bond with the princess was not just gossip. It was becoming a spark that might ignite conflict. Lysera knew this, and so did Ethan. She told him one evening as they stood on the palace balcony, the galaxy will not sit still. They will try to use you against us. They will call you a curse. But I do not see you as a curse. Ethan looked out at the stars. I am not sure what I am yet. All I know is I cannot walk away now. Behind them, shadows moved in the palace halls. Not all nobles were willing to wait for rivals to strike. Some whispered of plans to remove the human quietly, before he could bring more change. The backlash had begun. Ethan's victory in the arena had given him honor in the eyes of some, but it had also painted a target on his back. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see if the human would rise higher or fall. The night was calm, the stars shining above the Villery capital like silver dust. The palace towers glowed faintly, their crystal walls alive with soft light. To anyone looking from afar, it seemed peaceful. But inside the palace walls, danger was already moving. Ethan could not sleep. He walked through the quiet halls, his mind full of doubts. Every whisper he heard in the palace reminded him that many nobles still wanted him gone. He thought of Lysera's words, how she believed in him, yet he wondered if belief was enough to protect them both. As he turned a corner, he noticed something strange. 2 guards were missing from their usual post. Instead, shadows shifted where the light should have been steady. Ethan stopped, his instincts warning him. Then the silence broke. A figure leaped from the dark with a blade of glowing crystal. Ethan ducked just in time, the strike cutting the air above his head. His heart raced as another attacker came forward. They were dressed in dark cloaks, their faces hidden, but Ethan knew at once they were not raiders from outside. These were people from inside the palace. He ran back toward Lysera's chambers, shouting as he moved. The alarms had not yet rung. That meant the attackers had planned this carefully. Lysera was already awake when Ethan burst into her room. She had felt the unease in the air. The princess looked at him, her eyes wide but steady. Ethan said quickly, "They are here." Inside the palace. Before she could answer, the doors burst open. 3 masked figures stormed in, weapons ready. Ethan grabbed a metal staff from the wall, something meant for display rather than battle, but it was all he had. The fight was rough and uneven. Ethan had no training, but he had determination. He blocked one strike, then another, his arms shaking under the weight of the blows. Lysera, though a princess, was not helpless. She activated a crystal device from her wrist, releasing a burst of light that blinded one of the attackers. For a moment, they gained ground. But more shadows filled the hall. The palace had been breached in many places. Outside the windows, explosions echoed as enemy ships descended through the night sky. This was not just an assassination attempt. It was a full assault. Ethan and Lysera moved quickly, guided by her knowledge of hidden passages. They escaped through a narrow tunnel beneath the garden, the ground shaking above them. Ethan carried her forward when the tunnel collapsed in places, pushing through dust and falling stone. At last, they reached a chamber lit by glowing vines. From there, they could see the battle in the skies. Velarre ships clashed with dark enemy vessels, beams of energy cutting through the night. The enemy fleet was larger than expected, a coalition of rivals who had joined together, seeing the human bond as weakness to exploit. Ethan stood beside Lysera, his chest rising with heavy breaths. He said, "They came because of me." Lysera shook her head firmly. "They came because they fear change. You are not the reason, Ethan. You are the proof that their fear is real." Before Ethan could answer, a loud voice came from behind. It was Commander Saren, one of the loyal palace guards, leading a small group of soldiers. He bowed to Lysera and said, "Princess, the Emperor ordered us to protect you. The enemy has breached the outer walls. We must reach the inner stronghold." Ethan gripped the staff tighter. He had no armor, no training, but he knew he could not stand aside. He walked beside Lysera and Saren as they moved through the hidden corridors. Each corner brought more danger, more attackers, yet together they pushed through. When they reached the stronghold gates, Ethan looked up at the sky through a broken arch. Human eyes were sharp, and in that moment he saw something the Velarre did not. A weakness in the enemy formation. Their fleet was pressing too close together, their ships moving with arrogance rather than care. Ethan pointed it out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "There. If your ships push into that gap, they can cut the fleet apart." Saren looked doubtful, but Lysera said with confidence, "Do it." He sees what others do not. The commander relayed the orders, and soon the Velarre fleet shifted. Just as Ethan predicted, the enemy line broke under the sudden strike. Ships fell one by one, fire lighting the dark sky. For the first time that night, hope returned. Lysera turned to Ethan, her hand gripping his. Her voice was soft but strong. "Tonight proves it again. You are not here by accident. You were meant to stand with us. Ethan, breathless and tired, gave a faint smile. I am no hero. I am just a human who does not know when to quit. The palace still shook with battle, but the tide was beginning to turn. And in that moment, Ethan realized something important. He was no longer just a visitor from Earth. He was part of this fight. The galaxy had tested him, and he had not stepped back. The battle outside the palace had ended. Smoke still rose from the broken ships, and distant alarms echoed across the city. The Villery fleet had won, but the cost was clear. Walls were damaged, streets were littered with debris, and the court whispered nervously about the attack. Ethan stood beside Princess Lysera on the balcony of the restored palace tower. The night sky was filled with stars, calm after the chaos. His clothes were dusty, his face streaked with sweat, yet he stood tall. The weight of the past hours sat heavy on his shoulders, but so did a quiet pride. Lysera looked at him, her eyes shining in the soft light. She reached for his hand, holding it gently. Her touch was familiar now, no longer strange or distant. The bond between them had grown stronger through danger, through fear, and through courage. The palace had recognized Ethan's bravery. Nobles who had once doubted him now spoke quietly of respect. Even the emperor, who had watched closely, nodded to Ethan during the council meeting. The human had proven himself worthy not by birth, but by his actions and heart. Ethan shook his head with a faint laugh. I still do not understand how a joke led to all of this. Lysera smiled, her voice soft but certain. It was not a joke. It was a beginning. What you did today, yesterday, and in the trial shows who you are. You are not like the others who only follow rules and fear the unknown. You see possibilities. You act when others hesitate. That is why I answered you. Ethan's heart skipped. Her words reminded him of that moment in the Great Hall when he had first said, "Hey, sweetie." He had been nervous, foolish, and completely unaware of the weight of his words. Yet Lysera had answered, "Yes, darling." At the time, it had seemed strange. Now, after everything, he understood. The court gathered in the grand hall later that evening. Nobles, guards, and attendants watched as Lysera spoke before them. She told the assembly of Ethan's courage, his intelligence, and his loyalty. She spoke of the trial, the battle, and how humans could surprise even the oldest empires with determination and heart. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then a slow clap began from one of the nobles, followed by others. Some still hesitated, but the majority bowed to Ethan, acknowledging his place beside the princess. Ethan looked at Lysera, unsure what to say. He had never expected this, never wanted attention, and yet here he was, accepted not for his status, but for his actions. Lysera's hand tightened around his. Her voice was quiet but meant only for him. Do you accept what this means? Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had fought, survived, and proved himself. But accepting this bond, fully and openly, was something he had not planned for. Yet when he looked into her eyes, all doubt faded. He nodded. Yes, he said simply. Lysera's face broke into a soft smile. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his cheek as she repeated once more, "Yes, darling." The hall erupted in whispers and quiet laughter. Some of the nobles shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled, realizing that even in a galaxy filled with power and politics, courage and honesty could shine brighter than any rule. Later, Ethan and Lysera walked through the palace gardens. The moonlight reflected on the